Rainwater slipped through the narrow alley in thin, trembling streams, pooling around broken glass and discarded cardboard like the city itself had begun to cry. The CEO had only chosen this route because his driver was late and the meeting in his head refused to end. His phone buzzed in his hand with unread messages, but then, soft, almost swallowed by the rain, a voice stopped him cold. "Sir, please." He turned, expecting no one. Instead, a little girl stood near a dented dumpster, barefoot on the wet concrete. Her dress was too light for the cold, clinging to her thin frame, and her hair was tied with a worn ribbon that had lost its color long ago. In her hands was a small plastic bag holding 2 apples, bruised but carefully wiped clean. She looked up at him with eyes far older than her years. "Sir," she said again, her voice shaking but determined, "Mommy can't walk." Something tightened in his chest. He followed her pointing finger and saw a woman slumped against the brick wall at the end of the alley. One leg lay twisted at an unnatural angle, her jeans darkened with blood and rain. Her face was pale, teeth clenched as she tried to hide the pain from her child. "I told her not to bother anyone," the woman whispered when she saw him. "I didn't want her to beg." The CEO knelt instantly, his expensive suit soaking into the filthy ground without a second thought. "How long have you been hurt?" he asked gently. "Since morning," the woman answered, her voice barely there. "I slipped. I tried to stand, but I couldn't." The little girl stepped closer, clutching the hem of his coat. "I tried to help her, sir," she said softly. "I held her, but she's heavy. I saved an apple for later so she wouldn't be hungry." Her words struck harder than any accusation ever could. He had signed contracts worth millions, negotiated lives and livelihoods across polished tables, yet here was a child carrying a weight no child ever should. Without hesitation, he removed his coat and wrapped it around the woman's trembling shoulders. "I'm going to carry you," he said, firm but calm. "You're safe now." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to trouble." "You're not," he said, cutting her off gently. He lifted her into his arms, careful, steady, feeling how light she was, too light for someone who had been fighting this hard. The rain soaked his shirt, her blood stained his sleeve, but he didn't notice. All he noticed was the small girl walking beside him, her tiny hand gripping his jacket as if letting go might make him disappear. As they reached the mouth of the alley, the girl looked up at him. "You won't leave us, will you?" The question cracked something deep inside him. He remembered another night, another voice, his own child once asking for help when the world felt too big. "No," he said quietly, holding the woman closer. "I won't." The car's engine hummed softly, a small shield against the relentless rain outside. The woman rested in the back seat, wrapped in the CEO's coat, trembling from both pain and cold. Every small movement sent a jolt through her fractured leg, but she didn't want to trouble him. She tried to speak, her voice a fragile whisper. I didn't want pity. I fell. I couldn't." The CEO shook his head, his eyes fixed on the road but his hands steady on the wheel. "You didn't ask for pity," he said gently. "You survived. That's enough." The little girl sat on the edge of the seat, her damp hair clinging to her face. She had been silent, watching every motion, every gesture, measuring the strange, comforting presence of the man who had carried her mother through the rain. Her small hand reached out, brushing against her mother's arm, ensuring she was still safe. By the time they reached the hospital, he carried the woman inside himself, refusing to let her touch the wet ground. Nurses rushed to meet him, questions flying, but he simply placed her down gently and said, "She can't walk yet. Help her." The little girl hesitated at the entrance, her eyes wide and shimmering. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the smells unfamiliar, yet she clung to the edge of his coat, afraid that the warmth and safety would vanish. Before he stepped fully inside, he knelt to meet her gaze. "I'll stay," he promised softly, his voice steady. I'm a dad too. I know how it feels when someone you love needs help." Her lips trembled, and she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his chest. Silent tears slid down her cheeks, soaking into his suit. He didn't mind. He held her as if he could shield her from every hurt in the world. The small, fragile connection between them, forged in the darkness of an alley and the cold of a rainy night, was unshakable. Hours later, after doctors had examined her mother and confirmed a fractured hip that had been untreated for too long, he remained in the hospital waiting room. The little girl had fallen asleep in a plastic chair, still clutching the bruised apple she had saved. Her mother, now in a hospital bed, slept fitfully, pain fading under careful medication. The CEO sat quietly, watching over them both, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. In boardrooms, he had power and influence, but here, he realized, in the quiet moments of compassion, he could make a difference that mattered far more than any deal. The rain outside had stopped, but inside, a bond had formed, one that would not be broken, forged not by wealth or status, but by small hands asking for help and a man brave enough to answer. Weeks passed, but the alley that had once held fear and helplessness was now only a memory. The woman's recovery had been steady, guided quietly by the CEO who had arranged a small, sunlit apartment for her and her daughter. It was simple, warm, and full of life, far from the damp, dark streets they had once called home. He never revealed his identity, only that he worked, nearby, and wanted to help. There were no headlines, no recognition, just quiet, consistent care. The little girl now walked to school each morning in shoes that fit properly, her lunchbox clutched tightly in her small hands instead of fear or bruised fruit. Every day, she waved at a sleek black car parked across the street, hoping he would notice, hoping he would know she remembered. Inside, her mother practiced walking without crutches, each step slower, careful, but growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across the room, the woman paused mid-step. "Why did you help us?" she asked softly, her voice still carrying a tremor of disbelief. She had healed, yes, but the question weighed heavy. Why would a man, a stranger with so much, risk his comfort for people he didn't know? The CEO, seated nearby, swallowed. His eyes softened. "Because once, my son asked a stranger for help when I couldn't walk anymore after my wife died," he said, his voice low but steady. The memory was raw, a pain that never fully left him. Helping them now was more than charity, it was a promise he had longed to keep. Tears welled in the woman's eyes, not from pain, but from gratitude, understanding, and awe. The little girl ran forward before anyone could speak further, wrapping her arms tightly around his legs. "Then you're our miracle too," she said, her small voice full of conviction and warmth. He bent down, lifting her gently into his arms, holding her close. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist, the bustling city, the boardrooms, the pressures of wealth, all irrelevant in the presence of two lives he had touched. He realized then, with a clarity that no business deal could ever give him, that some rescues didn't happen in offices or under bright lights. They happened in dark alleys, in quiet hospitals, in the trembling hands of children who had the courage to ask, "Please, help us." And so, in that small apartment, among the laughter of a child and the healing of a mother, the single dad CEO understood something profound. Wealth and power could solve problems, but compassion, simple, unwavering compassion, had the power to heal hearts. And sometimes, it was in answering the softest, smallest pleas that one discovered the greatest strength of all.